can start.
Okay.
But
they'll keep joining. Let's just.
Recording cloud.
Okay.
Cloud. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Kamini, you can start. I think you can stop sharing, Jameela, then we'll.
Kalyani ji has joined.
But I think Kamini got disconnected, I think.
Kamini is disconnected, yeah.
Shall we wait for her? Or...
Kamini is joining again.
No, she is joining again.
Yeah, she has joined.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I start, Usha?
Yes.
Should we wait for some more time?
No, you can start, please.
Okay. Let me first wish everyone a very good day. Today's program is under the auspices of Literary and Cultural Forum, and the speaker is Dr. Jameela Begum. She needs no introduction at all. Because she's one of us. She represents the Trivandrum branch, and she's also the director of the Literary and Cultural Forum. And today's session is session 28. Though you may know about little bit about her, Dr. Jameela is a full package. You must be wondering what I mean by a full package. So I'll just tell you what the package means. An acclaimed educationist and scholar, Dr. Jameela Begum A. presents a rare blend of excellence in academics and administration. During her tenure of 32 years of teaching and research in University of Kerala, Professor Begum served as the head Department of English and founder director of Center of Canadian Studies, Dean, Faculty of Arts and Senate member, and known for her scholarship. Professor Begum followed up her PhD in English literature with postdoctoral research in areas as diverse as women's issues, diaspora writing, language skills, and Indo-Canadian studies. As a visiting professor at reputed universities in India and abroad, she has played a crucial role in disseminating key concepts of culture, history, and literature, and widening the scope for innovative Indian pedagogical systems. She has also delivered many keynote addresses in both international and national conferences. She has also published a lot of articles in various journals, and she has guided about 25 PhD students who occupy high positions in the country. She has published about 12 books. She was the first woman president of the Indian Association for Canadian Studies. As the secretary of the International Council for Canadian Studies, an organization which has a representation of 30 countries, she traveled extensively to promote studies and research in diverse areas that were beneficial to the two countries. And during her tenure as secretary of ICCS, she represented India at the World Council meetings at Ottawa, Vancouver, Brussels, and London. As a mark of acknowledgement of her outstanding contribution to the area of bilateral collaboration in higher education and her leadership initiatives strengthening bilateral ties, she was awarded the Merit Award of IACS. She was a keynote speaker at the Asia Pacific Conference at the University of Wollongong, Australia, and at the University of Meiji, Tokyo. She was a recipient of both the Faculty Research Fellowship and Faculty Enrichment Award instituted by Government of Canada. When coming to Kerala, she took the leadership in introducing communicative language teaching in University of Kerala after doing a course in TESOL at the Institute of Education, University of London, on a British Council Fellowship. She's also instrumental in starting the UGC Area Study Program in Canadian Studies and launching the Special Assistance Program of UGC at the Institute of English. Again, at the national level, she was the president of India's nominee to the Executive Committee of the English and Foreign Languages University in Hyderabad. She was a UGC expert for Area Studies Program at the University of Hyderabad and the SAP program at Shantiniketan, Kolkata. She was an advisory member for restructuring of higher education initiated by Higher Education Council, Government of Kerala, and has served the government in various capacities as member of Curriculum Committee, State Education Advisory Board, chairperson of the Textbook Committee, and member of the Textbook Commission. She has also sat on various selection boards for UPSC, universities, and colleges. She was instrumental in constructing and disseminating the foundation course in communicative English as chairperson of the Curriculum Committee of the Additional Skill Acquisition Program of the Government of Kerala. And she's brought out a text in this regard. And this text is extensively used in Kerala and even other states to equip students to meet the demands of skilled labor. She was also instrumental in giving training to hundreds of trainees to transact this material across the state. And this has definitely brought about a great improvement in the teaching and learning of English in the state. She is currently an executive member on the board of State Institute of Educational Management and Training and the State Leadership Academy that is designed to instill leadership qualities in professions and among professionals and administrators. She continues to contribute to the development of society and the younger generation. And she's currently, as I told you earlier, she's the director of Cultural and Literary Forum of the All India Women's Conference of Trivandrum branch. And she's also a committed and social worker and a creative writer. And she continues to give leadership to many activities that can bring about a change in Muslim women's role in society. So that is why I said she is a full package of knowledge. And so we appreciate what you have done, Dr. Jameela. I welcome you to today's program. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's heartening to welcome Kuljit Ji, former Secretary General, All India Women's Conference, and Jameela Ji, who's the Vice President, and of course our patron, Mrs. Indra Ramakrishna Pillai, of course Usha Nayak, who's a member in charge of liaison with international NGOs and agencies regarding climate change. And I also welcome our Secretary GB, our President Jalada Chechi, and the members of the AIWC-TVPM chapter, and also the members of all other branches in India. Now today's talk.
Kalyani Raj has also joined, President.
Okay, I also would like to, I'm happy to welcome Kalyani Raj, who's the President. Welcome, ma'am. She's not on the audio, I think. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Kamini.
Okay, ma'am. So she's going to talk on the Indigenous People of Canada, History, Culture and Literature. This comes under the series Culture and Literature of the G20 countries. So once again, welcome Dr. Jameela. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamini, for that very warm and gracious introduction. Today, when we all get together, we are in fact under the umbrella of what we would call the discussions that are going on about G20 themes. So today, I thought we would begin with a theme that really is a matter of concern for peoples all over the world. So today's talk is going to be on the Indigenous people of Canada. Greetings to all the members who have joined us on this platform, and a warm welcome to the President of the AIWC and all other members here. I'm also grateful to Shania for giving me this opportunity to direct a whole series of talks on the literature, history, and culture of the G20 countries. But thinking about that, particularly in the context of the globalized education and the holistic development of the individual that we are all looking for in the younger generation, we felt, the Trivandrum chapter of the AIWC felt that it would be a good idea to bring on this platform the culture and history and literature of the 20-odd countries that constitute the G20 countries. The purpose of this series was to introduce us, because as you know, of 20 countries, nobody would know in detail or in depth about the people there. So we thought we would look at the people of these 20 countries, how their lived and living experiences have contributed to the writing and the art forms of these countries, to give expression to their lives. And that is why we feel that literature is a tool that expresses both the intellectual as well as the emotional nuances of experience. And this is diverse in different countries. It is also a tool that heals the agony of life. Self-revelations, autobiographies, and writing about self and experiences purge the intensity of experience. They tell us stories that are churned in the crucible of experiences, and that which opens out into words, into painting, into craft, and even into the stitching of a carpet together. The seamless stitching of a carpet, you find, is a way of the expression of the women, of the native women, to extol their grief, their agony, and at the same time to be creative about it. So it's in this context that we go into the G20 deliberations and look at education as a very holistic concept, as I said. And I also feel that the factual and the imagination hold hands in this journey of truth and peace we hope to bring to this world. We started these deliberations in April with a talk titled G20 Journey and Beyond. Today, we look at the history and culture and literature of the original inhabitants of Canada. These inhabitants are called the Indigenous people of Canada. I'd first like to introduce you to the map of Canada, because for most people, the west of America is Canada. But Canada is a huge territory that extends from the Atlantic coast on the islands Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and Brunswick, right up to the west, where you have the Pacific Ocean. So it's a country that stretches across from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And Canada is a young nation of not more than, say, 200 years old. When you look at the immigrants, the white population that have come into this land. But it is also a very, very old civilization of people who are what we call the natives of Canada. And they are the people who first occupied these territories. So today, if we know Canada as a country with its independence, with its prime minister, and with its policies, and having the longest undefended border between America and Canada, this is a country to which immigrants from all over the world have come, settled down, and made Canada what it is. So initially, when we look at this map, we get this feeling that Yukon and British Columbia, that is on the west, and then you have the provinces Alberta, the Saskatchewan, Manitoba, then we have Ontario, Quebec. Quebec is a French-speaking area. And further north, we have the last of the provinces that was inducted into the Canadian nation, which is called the Nunavut. We'll come to that a little later. And here we have the Northwest Territories, which is a huge piece of land. So one thing we have to remember is that this is very near the North Pole, the Alaskan regions, and naturally Canada has been known for its harsh winters, but Canada is one of the beautiful countries that I have traveled in, and particularly when you go there in the summer and the spring seasons. Now, coming to the word Canada, how did Canada get its name? Canada, as a word, as a term, it comes from the Cree language. The Cree is a group of indigenous people in Canada. And for them, the word Kakanata was a word that literally meant that which is clean. And the full term, Kakanada Aski, that is the land that is clean and that which belongs to the Creator. So you get this feeling that here are a group of people who really worshipped the land, felt that the cleanliness of the land belonged to the Creator, and therefore they were also part of the Creator. And when the Cree describes himself, this is a Cree word, ni yo, they are saying, we are members of that nation of people who are part of the 4 seasons of Mother Earth. So interestingly enough, when we talk about the Aborigines, as they were once called, they were also called the First Nations people, but they prefer to be known by the word indigenous now because they feel that indigenous is a term that connects them not only to all the different groups in Canada, but also to other tribal groups all over the world. They are known as the indigenous people, the people who really belong to the land, and the land was their mother. And primarily because of that, they do not even think about selling the land, because you do not sell a mother. And for them, land is something that is sustainable and that gives them nourishment and protects them and gives them a life which they live in companionship and cooperation. So this word Canada becomes very, very meaningful for us in the present context, where we are all thinking about cooperation. We are thinking about diversity, but we are also thinking about amity and peace. And we know that Canada, by measures now, as I said, is a very young country, because the population that came into Canada were European immigrants, and they came during the early 19th century. And even the most historic cities in Canada are rarely more than 200 years, because when the Aborigines or the indigenous people lived, there were no cities. That was a part of Westernization. Now, from where did the natives or the Aboriginal people come into Canada? This is a very interesting piece of history that we have here. Archaeologists believe that the first people of Canada belonged to the Amerindian race, who migrated from Western North America, approximately 23,000 and 12,000 years ago. So that long period of 23,000 to 12,000 years, people were immigrating, and the 2 continents that we know, or the massive bridge between Eurasia and the Americas, was the Bering Plain, and people they came in numbers, in millions, into this new land. And that is how Canada was populated about 23 years to 12,000 years ago with the Aborigines or the indigenous people. So today, even when we say that Canada is a young nation, we have to acknowledge the fact Canada has a very, very old civilization like India. Who are the Aboriginals? Let's start with the term Aboriginal. And as I said, Aboriginal is another word for indigenous. The Aboriginal people are divided into 50 nations or tribes, and they have smaller bands, 600 smaller bands, which are more of a political community. But if you look at the way in which the land lies, you will find that there are 6 broad groups in Canada, and these broad groups have their own distinct ways of life, culture, and beliefs. So Canada has many tribes, and the tribes, or they call themselves nations. The Aborigine, each of the Cree is a nation. Or you talk about the Okanagan, which is another tribe, that is also a nation. So today, when we dismiss them as tribes, we have to remember they lived as distinct nations from one another. And mostly they were hunters or they were gatherers of food. They would either hunt for their sustenance, or they would farm for their sustenance or fish. So fishing, hunting, and farming were the occupations or the professions of these early people. And one of the things that they write about in their literature as well as stories is marked by a deep respect for nature, egalitarian and communal social values, and deep and detailed spiritual beliefs. And today we think they don't have a permanent house, but many had permanent housing because they stayed near the farms and the stables. But they also had a distinct tradition of song and dance and art. Now, this is a picture of what Canada was before it got divided into the different provinces that I talked about earlier. Before the European immigrants came into Canada, Canada was divided into what is today known as the eastern woodlands on the eastern side, and the Great Plains. Then we have the plateau, the northwest coast, the subarctic, and the Arctic. Now, the eastern woodlands is the largest native community, and they live in farms around St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes. Along this part of the country, there are many large lakes, and the lakes have, in fact, made the land very fertile, and these lakes gave them the sustenance through fishing. So farming and fishing were the main occupations of the tribes or the natives of the eastern woodlands. And the tribes that belonged to this particular stretch of land, the eastern woodlands, were the Algonquin, Hurons, Mohawk, Mi'kmaq, Ojibwe, Ottawa. So these are all unfamiliar names for us, just as when we talk about the tribals in India. Many of these names are quite unfamiliar. That's because that is not used in everyday parlance, or it is not known to the world. So they were a silent group of people who were not known to the rest of the world. It is not that they did not have a voice. They had a voice, but they were not heard by the rest of humanity. So they had their distinct forms of civilization and culture. One of the interesting things I still remember about the eastern woodlands is once I had gone for a conference to Toronto. And at this conference, it was a conference on feminism, I think. And there were some of these women who belonged to the Mohawk tribe, and also those who belonged to the Ottawa tribe. Now, when the European women began to talk about feminism in singular, earlier, you know that when feminism rose, they all talked about the lives of women as being uniform. But we know that the lives of women of different religions, of different stratas of society, of different groups are different. So when the Blacks, or what we know today called the African Canadians, and the native population, the Aboriginals, were also there at this conference. So when Laura Lou, who was a French Canadian woman, a white woman, she began to talk about we women, immediately these women at the back of the hall got up and marched to the dais and said, we are not represented here. And when you see we are not what the we you are talking about. So there was a huge hue and cry at the seminar. That was on the first day. And on the second day of the seminar, something very interesting happened. This was in 1990, I remember. And this was soon after what we know as the Oka tragedy. Now, this Oka tragedy, historically, if you go back, is a reference to the burial grounds of the natives. Oka was a region where the elders, the older generation were called the elders. The elders lived and were buried. So the English people wanted to build a golf course on this burial ground. And naturally, the native Indians revolted. And this was a great uprising in the 1990s, which lasted for many years until the Europeans gave up the idea of the Gold Coast. And this was known as the Oka tragedy. In fact, in this Oka tragedy, many lost their lives in this rebellion. So when we talk about the Eastern Woodlands, we are also talking about different groups of people living in this particular area and having different concerns. When we come to the Great Plains, now the Great Plains is also known as the prairies. And the prairies is what we call the landlocked area. Here we have the sea, the Atlantic Sea, and on the other side we have the Pacific Sea. But here is a landlocked area which is called the Great Plains, and is comprised of the provinces of today, that is Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. These are the three provinces that constitute the prairies. The prairies are flat lands, and usually on these prairies, farming and forest land were used for sustenance. Here we have the nations or the groups who are known as the Blackfoot, the Cree, the Ojibwe, and the Siso. So this is another group, another number of groups in this particular area. Now, when we come to this dark space here, which is called the plateau, this is the southeastern side of British Columbia. This part, which is known as the Northwest Coast, is British Columbia. And this part of Canada is one of the most beautiful places. And I had the opportunity to go down in a plane once when it was October, and it is full of maple trees. And as you know, the maple trees change color after winter. And when they move into spring, the leaves come. And by the time it is summer and early October, the leaves begin to drop. But before they drop, they change their hue and color. You must have seen many pictures of that. So here is a very beautiful countryside. And it is here that the people of Haida, Nootka, and Salishan lived. Now, the group known as the Haida, very interestingly, is represented in Ottawa, that is on the Eastern Woodland side, by what is known as the Museum of Natives, the Museum of Civilization, they call it. And the Haida people are represented in a boat, in an ivory boat, and all of them inside the boat, and reminds you of Noah's Ark and how a group of people survived. Now, the plateau is the rocky Cascado Mountains, and it is here that we have very close to the subarctic region. And in the subarctic region, there's a long space of land from the west to the east, that is in the light blue color. And the people here are nomads. They don't have permanent settlements. They keep moving, caravan type of life, and they hunt the caribou. The caribou is another word for reindeer. So Santa Claus and reindeer coming from the Arctic, from the Arctic. Now, around here in this map, you don't have Nunavut, because Nunavut was a territory that came very late into Canada and was named as Nunavut. But in this Arctic region, we have people who were once called Eskimos. But these Eskimos do not want to be called Eskimos any longer. They say we are Inuits, and we have a language which is Inuktitut, and we speak the language. So we are people of the Arctic. So this is roughly what Canada was at one point of time. I'm skipping all this because I've already told you about this. This is a picture of the natives. I've just got out one group of natives, that is the Mohawks. Down here, you have the Inuits, who were once called Eskimos. Here we have another group of people who are called the Métis. Now, the Métis, particularly on the prairies, were groups of people who were the children of parents who were either English or French or German or Russian on one side and on the other native. So they were called the mixed breed, or they were called the half breed. So we have a large number of natives who were seduced, who were raped sometimes, and who were utilized by the men who had come from different countries and left women with children, and children with whom they could not bring up. So they had to find other resources. So when we talk about the Indians, the Metis and the Inuits, it's interesting to remember that Métis is also constructed of Aboriginal people, and they are mostly French Canadian. But there are people of other mixed groups also. Now, it was in 1982 that these three groups of Indigenous people in Canada were accepted as Indians, Métis, and Inuits. And the word Indian, as I said, later came to be known as Aboriginal, then came to be known as Native, at times First Nations, and today Indigenous is becoming the most accepted word. So it is in the 1970s that this happened, and they identify themselves with the diverse community. So they don't exist as separate communities without a broad umbrella, like we talk about different states in Kerala being part of India. Here are different nations of tribals who together are known as the indigenous people, and they fight for their rights together. Now, if you look at the numbers, the Aboriginal people make up 4.9% of Canada's population, and 2 lakh First Nations people and Inuit were living in what is now Canada when Europeans began to settle in the 16th century. And for the next 200 years, of course, the indigenous population declined, but now it is slowly coming up. And today, some 1 million people in Canada identify themselves as First Nations, and there are Métis and Inuits. The settlers, of course, came much later, as I said, only by the 1490s, by the 1500s, the 16th century. And it was not until 1608 that French sailors built the first permanent European settlement in what is now called Canada. The French had come to trade, and fur trade was an important industry to begin with. And as with India, when colonization happened, what we found was that they came, settled down, and before long, they tried to establish churches. And from the 70s until 1996, there were many schools that were built in order to what they call teach indigenous children. And unfortunately, these schools were full of physical, mental, and sexual abuse, neglect, and other forms of violence. And the children of the natives were forcibly taken away from them to these residential schools. I told about the Métis. They did not have the resources to look after their children. And most of the indigenous people who were driven out of their land when the Europeans settled, the cultivable lands and the undergrounds, they were put into what is known as reserves. And as usually happens, these natives began to, deprived of their livelihood, they resorted to bootlegging, selling illicit liquor, and becoming drunkards. So the life became a mess for them. So all that was once there was totally destroyed by the immigrants. And today, in 2015, there is a national truth that has come out, which talks about Canadian government having committed cultural genocide by forcing more than 150,000 Indigenous children to attend residential schools. And many faced abuse, and thousands died. And particularly, this struck the limelight when 200 Indigenous children, the bodies of 200 Indigenous children, including some as young as three-year-old, were found in a former residential school grounds in British Columbia. And it reminded people of the violence inflicted by the residential school. So the residential schools were not something that helped the children, but really destroyed the native tradition. Now, having said that, I would like to talk now about the literature of the people of the early people, or the what you call the inhabitants, the indigenous people of Canada. Now, one of the things that we learn about all old civilizations is that they have an oral tradition, telling oral stories, passing myths, folklore, and legends. And they pass on these oral traditions with great care, because it is on the part of the storyteller to retain the moral of the tale and its underlying truth. These have to be retold accurately. And therefore, songs, prayers, spiritual teaching, shaping everyday life of the community and the individual sense of identity. Now, this oral tradition is, of course, storytelling. How do the elders, these are the elders. They were very much respected by the tribes. They were something like the chieftain of the tribe. And there is a novel which is called The Temptation of Big Bear. Big Bear was a great elder at that time, so also Louis Riel. So the number of old generation indigenous people were the carriers of the oral tradition, and they passed it down to their younger generation. The knowledge and wisdom of the elders sort of serve the link between the older and the younger generation. And it was only after the English and the French came that they prioritized written literature. So it's the oral literature that becomes very interesting. Now, this is something. The slide here is something that tells us about listening to a story. One of the elders in this telling of the story, trying to teach tradition and history and responsibilities and cultural views, he tells the children to listen without interrupting. And then he says, asking a lot of questions is considered to be disrespectful. Stories are meant to be heard with twice the concentration, because we are given 2 ears, and less talking because we have one mouth. So this is the way in which the elders tried to sort of mold the younger generation. And talking about oral tradition, it is the transmission of more knowledge that is passed down across generations. Talking about an oral story, one of the earliest oral stories about the settlers into Canada is about how they came into this land. The story goes like this. The natives had cut down a tree and were sitting on the tree stump. They were sitting on the log of the tree. And the story is that one of the Europeans came and asked the native to push a little. And he pushed a little and gave space for the foreigner. And then another foreigner came, and then he said, will you push a little? So slowly the foreigners came one by one and pushed off the natives who had no longer the tree to call his own. This is what happened in Canada. So the way in which the slow infiltration into the land, not only taking away the land, but taking away their language, their oral culture, their tradition, their history. And this has happened. And now, today, the Aborigines or the indigenous people are fighting to come back, to be heard, as they said. And James Lamouche, who's a well-known oral story proponent, says, memory, lived experience, and language converge into stories, myths, legends, and songs. And that is why even today, when you talk about how Canada was slowly infiltrated into by foreigners or by the British and the European countries, one remembers the story of how they were pushed out. Now, that is only a story or a folklore that goes around. But what really happened was they used to come ashore, the foreign settlers used to come ashore and give them trinkets and other things that caught their fancy. And without knowing it, the natives signed on the papers that they showed them and signed away their land. So it is like saying they never knew that they were signing it, was signing away their land. So today they say we would never have signed away our Mother Earth if we had known what we were doing. Now, this is an oral story that is very interesting. It's about creation. And most of these tribes have stories about how the world originated, how the earth came into being. One of the stories describes the origins of the cosmos and the interrelations of its elements. And among them is the story of what is called the Earth Diver myth. This is the story where a great spirit or a cultural hero dives or orders animals to dive into their primeval water to bring back mud out of which the earth is fashioned, out of which the earth has been created. But one of the interesting stories that I have always liked is the story about the turtle land. Canada is also known as the turtle land. This is another name for Canada. This oral story about the turtle is about how a beautiful maiden up in the skies was playing, up in the heavens was playing, and there was only water, there was no land. In all these myths and stories, we find there is a sky and there is the water, but land eventually came. And while she was playing, the clouds went apart and she fell from the sky. Now, as this beautiful damsel was falling from the sky, a number of swallows were flying around. So they built a net for her to sit on with their wings. So she sat on it. And then the swallows flew for some time with her, but they got tired. And then they looked down and then they saw that there was a turtle in the water. It was a small turtle. So they asked the turtle, shall we land on your back? And the turtle said, yes, come and land on my back. So the turtles landed on the swallows landed the girl on the turtle's back. And the story goes like this, that when the girl sat on the turtle became bigger and bigger and bigger and became the earth. And the girl began to breed other humans. So this is all a folklore, this is all a legend or a story. And that is why it is today known as the turtle land. But mark me, the natives believe in this story. We would think it is something like today we believe in, say, Noah's Ark or the creation of the earth because we have been brought up with this belief. And for the indigenous people, this is as true a story about creation as our stories about creation. And whenever they tell their stories, they also tell everybody, that the younger generation, that everything is interrelated and there is a universal balance and harmony. And now if you upset that balance, you will be punished for it. For instance, when hunting or eating or tanning hides, they had to offer tobacco and a prayer of thanksgiving. So they had temples of what you call of worship, of giving thanks. One of the temples that I was able to see when I was there was a raven temple. A raven is seen as a supernatural abiding force by the natives. On top of the temple, there's a huge raven, and the temple is circular in its structure. And when you go into the temple, everyone is allowed to go in. And you go into the temple, there are no wooden furnitures. There are only some cushions that are spread out. And these cushions are of 4 colors. And the light falls in from the roof through the raven's wings on a particular spot. And that is their place of worship. So these cushions There were white cushions, there were yellow cushions, there were brown cushions, and there were black cushions. So I asked the lady who had taken me there, why do you have these 4 colors here? He said, can you guess? So I paused for a moment and asked, does the white represent the white man who has come into your land? And she said, yes, they are the pale-faced. So the yellow, what do they represent? They are the people who belong to the Asian community, that is the Chinese, the Indians, and all that. Then I asked, what about the black? And then they said, that's the African Americans who have come. They all come there to worship. And then I asked, what about the red? And said, the red are the indigenous people because we are the lifeblood of the nation. So that's how they see themselves and how they look at a place of worship. There's another interesting story again about the young men of the Wolf clan. Now, this is a story about how the young men of this particular clan who live on the banks of the Nas River. One day have about things that they will have about of amusement, and they go and catch the salmon. And the fishing and the waters around the land, around Nas River, give them plenty of food. But when these young men catch the salmon without a purpose, and this is also a moral or a story that they are telling their young men, if you do something without a purpose, if you do something which exploits nature, then you will be cursed. So what happens is they catch salmons, they make slits in the fish's back and put in pieces of burning pitch pine into it and put them back in the water so that they can swim around like living torches. It was spectacular, it was exciting, and they did not think about the cruelty to the salmon or the waste of a good fish. The elders, of course, told them not to do it, but eventually what happened was there was thunder, the mountains broke open and the fire gushed forth, and it looked like all the river were on fire. And after that, the people could not catch fish from the river again, and only a few of them got away. And the cause of the conflagration was said by the shamans. The shamans are something like priests or religious heads, to be entirely due to the anger of the spirit world and the torture of the salmon. Thus, the powers of nature insisted on a proper regard for all their creatures. So that was the moral of the story. And this, I think, is something that needs to be told the world, that vagrant destruction and exploitation will be at our own cost, and it will be at our own expense. And because of that, maybe we'll reach a day when the world or the earth will not give us the sustenance we have been getting all along. And this is another artifact of the native Indians, particularly the Mohawks and the Mi'kmaq in the eastern woodlands, that is British, in the northwest coast and the British Columbia region. And this is an artifact that you find in a lot of places in Canada. These are known as totem poles, and these totem poles, interestingly, are they in fact encompass the strip of land from modern-day Alaska down through British Columbia, and they are a derivative of the Ojibwe word "doodem." Doodem has a societal role, and many animals like the dood, the crane represented political leaders, the bear, lynx, and wolf represented warriors. And in a way, the meaning of doodem mirrors the purpose and significance of the physical artifacts. And they are stylized versions of animals such as the wolf, eagle, thunderbird, killer whale, frogs, raven, salmon. The raven and salmon and the thunderbird are very common animals in Indian folklore. They have many spiritual beliefs as well. I'm going to skip a little here. They have what are known as the tricksters or supernatural beings in folklore, and many tricksters belonging to different tribes, like the Glooskap and the Malsum. One represents good, the other represents evil, as with every custom. And they also had the custom of the sun dance. They had medicine bundles with which they would heal the people. And they were also what is called the guardians of the land. And they were like the bear, or for the Inuits, it was the sea goddess Sedna. Now, when we talk about Inuit culture, particularly, the myth of Sedna is very prevalent among a number of tribes. Sedna is seen as a kind of a guardian of the seas. And it's a very powerful story of how Sedna was taken out in a boat, and her father did not want her. So he pushed her off the boat, and she still clung to the boat. So he cut off her fingers and she drowned into the water. And the belief goes that Sedna had very long hair, and because she had no hands or fingers to tie her hair, the mammals got entangled, that is the whale and the walrus and other creatures of the sea were entangled in her hair, and they would not be available for food for the people of the land. So the shamans had to appease the Sedna in order to release the animals. And that is one way in which there is also the feeling that is one of the reasons why in the Inuit areas there is more winter period, there is more ice and snow than in the rest of Canada. It's because we move towards the North Pole as well. So they say we are what we are. There is art also. I'll just quickly come to some of the literature that has come out from the Aboriginal people. Maria Campbell is Métis, and as I said, she is a half-breed. And this is the story where she talks about how she was taken away to a residential school, and the miserable life that she had there, and how, in spite of all that, towards the end of the story, she talks about how finally, as in the old days, they are able to come back, work hard, and they do not mind being called half-breeds because they know that they belong to both, that they are the people who own themselves, and they are not people who belong to the foreigners. Another novel, which is called The April Rain Tree, that is by Beatrice Cullerton, talks about two sisters, Cheryl and April. And the two sisters, one wants to break with tradition and move into the modern world. The other wants to keep her tradition and her beliefs and the life that was into which she has been born. So of the two sisters part, and during the period of partition, they both grow up, and finally April marries an Englishman, lives a very comfortable life, but she's not happy. Cheryl, on the other hand, finds it very difficult to meet both ends. She ends up as a prostitute. And at the beginning of the story, what we have is April comes to find Cheryl and finds that she is no longer what April had hoped for. She had become a prostitute. And unfortunately, in a street brawl, April is mistaken to be Cheryl, and she is raped and violated. And by the end of the story, what we have is Cheryl dies, and April takes over the the desire to keep up tradition, and Cheryl has a son whom she begins to look after. So in all these stories, what we find is that This is something that Cheryl and April says, where Cheryl says, I can't accept being matey. That is the hardest thing I have ever said to you, Cheryl. This is April telling Cheryl. And I'm glad you don't feel the same way I do. I'm so proud of what you are trying to do. But unfortunately, Cheryl is not able to make a good life. And in fact, if you look at the stories that are written both by Native writers as well as the white writers who are trying to portray Native writing, like George Riga, Rudy, we find they are very sympathetic towards the life of the natives and what really happens to a girl who goes into town and cannot find a job and finally ends up as a prostitute. And this is what happens to Cheryl. Janet Armstrong is another well-known writer, and she is also what you say an activist and an advocate for the rights of the indigenous people. So people hear her voice. Now, this is a poem I want to read out to you, which will show you the double nature of a woman. What you'd see, the two sides of a woman. And it is also a poem, I've written it like this, but it's also a poem which has on the left side all the negative qualities and on the right side all the positive qualities. So just listen to this poem. It's a poem I personally like very much. It reads like this. I'm a scaw, a heathen, a savage, basically a mammal. I'm a female, only in the ability to breed and bear papooses, to be carried quaintly on a board or lost to welfare. I have no feelings. The sinuous plains of my brown body carry no hint of the need to be caressed, desired, loved. Its only use to be raped, beaten, and bludgeoned in some B-grade Western. I have no beauty. The lines cut deep into my aged face are not from bitterness or despair at seeing my clan destroyed one by one. They are here to be painted and photographed, sold, and hung on the lawyer's wall. I have no emotions. Someone is lying. I am an Indian woman. Where I walk, beauty surrounds me. Grasses bend and blossom over valleys and hills, vast and multicolored in star-filled glory. I am the keeper of generations. I caress the lover gently, croon as I wrap the baby with quietness. I talk to the old ones and carefully lay to rest the loved ones. I am the strength of the nations. I am the giver of life to whole tribes. I carry the seeds carefully through dangerous wastelands, give them life, scattered among cold and towering concrete, watch them grow, battered and crippled under all the lives. I teach them the songs. I help them to hear. I gave them truth. I am a sacred trust. I am Indian woman. What more can you say of an Indian woman than that? Here is Rita Jo, who is a Mi'kmaq, and a very cryptic poem that she talks. I lost my talk, the talk you took away when I was a little girl. You snatched it away. I speak like you, I think like you, I create like you. And finally she says, so gently I offer my hand and ask, let me find my talk so I can teach you about me. So here is someone who has lost her talk. This is a film. I also wanted to bring in a film to show you that films are also being taken about in the Arctic, and it is being taken by people in the Nunavut territory, with the newly formed territory. And this is a very interesting movie. If you have a chance, see it. 2001 movie, which is called The Fast Runner. And it is all about hunting in ice and developing qualities of wisdom, strength, patience, and perseverance, and how the wisdom of the elders endure, and the climate change that can destroy culture, economy, and nature. Now, interestingly enough, the main character who played this role in Atar Joy as the fast runner had an occasion to come to the Institute of English when I was there. And we had a conference on the people of the northern regions, particularly the Nunavut territory. And we invited him, and he came with a very a white shirt, which was made of oil, very thin linen. And one of the students in the group asked, "You come from a very cold country, but how are you enduring the heat here?" And then he said, the dress that I am wearing is proof of that, because the heat here is something I cannot bear. So if you come to my country, this was what he said he rejoined, if you come to my country, I'm sure you will dress like me. So the way in which cooperation and the way in which people help one another is very, very significant. I'm closing this talk with this one last slide on the potlatch, which is a ceremony of companionship, of celebrations. And we talk about potluck, but they have the ceremony which is called potlatch. And you'll notice that in all these, there is the circular way of sitting together. So they face one another and they have sort of a companionship. And as Janet Armstrong says, I believe that the principles of cooperation are a sacred trust, and the plan and intent of the Creator shall therefore endure. So while we continuously resist cultural imperialism and seek meaning towards teaching cooperative relations and provide an integral mechanism for solutions correctly needed, not only in this country, I would say, in Canada, but all over the world. So let us live in peace, cooperation, and diversity. Thank you very much. So
Thank you, Jameela. That was so interesting. You took us to Canada. You took us to all the places where you mentioned. And it was very, very interesting. So proud of you. Anyway.
Thank you.
Maybe if anyone wants to interact with Jameela, Kuljit ji?
Jameela, can you stop sharing so that we can see you?
Yeah, yeah, right.
Can't hear you, Kuljit ji. Your audio is still not connected.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Jameela ji. You took us to another world, especially when you talked about the myths and all those stories. No, it was so fascinating. No, I just forgot that it was a webinar. It was as though we were watching everything, especially that earth diver myth. That was very attractive about the back of the turtle. Thank you so much. Your talks are always very interesting and very captivating. Thank you.
Anybody else? Shall I read the chat box, Jameela?
Yeah, do.
Kalyani Rajji, thank you, Jameela ji, for such an interesting narration of the history, culture, and indigenous community of Canada. Amazed at the similarity of our cultures of storytelling and verbal transfer of knowledge from generation to generation. Also, the relation of turtle to creation, like our Kurma avatar. Learned a lot. Thanks once again. All the best to Forum for successful continuation. Sorry to have to leave now.
Thank you, Kalyanji.
Kuljit Kaur has said, these stories and myths are very fascinating. Thanks, Jameela ji. And Bhuneshwari has said, as always, Professor Jameela excelled. Hats off to her for the research which has gone into the subject and the cool, clear way in which she imparted the information. Very happy to listen to her presentation. Very, very informative. Yes, could learn many new things. Here, interesting stories, especially the turtle story, and also why we have 2 years and 1 month. Hear more and talk less. Hemalata ji has said very excellent and detailed explanation. Thanks for relating to our Indian myth. Thanks, Jameela and Usha ji and other friends. Santana Malli ma'am has said it was wonderful and really we went to Canada, she said. You took us to Canada, Jameela.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Jameela, as everybody has said, a wonderful talk as usual, and it was really very informative. And I think it sort of justifies why we are having this series. Because now we realize that we know hardly anything about Canada. After listening to you,
Yes.
we realize that we know hardly anything, though Canada is such an advanced country, such a large country, and we hear and read so much about that country. So I'm sure that when we move on to the other countries in the G20 group, we will realize that we know less and less about each country. So there is a lot to learn. It is not just about the politics and economics and other things that Dr. Gopakumar explained so well last time. So G20 is not just about that. It is also an opportunity for us to learn about the culture, literature, and the history of all these countries. So it is, I think we realize that it has been a really excellent idea to start this series. And you have given an excellent start to the series after, of course, Dr. Gopakumar's brilliant talk gave us an introduction into that G20 itself. Now we are going behind that and learning about the people who actually make up the G20. Thank you so much, Jameela.
And somebody wanted to ask
Kalyani and
Actually,
Jameela,
Actually, I have, after this particular talk, I have already lined up for our series talks on Australia, Japan, and China. So that in that order, they will be coming next in the succeeding months.
I think somebody
So as
wanted
I said,
to interact. I
we
think.
could also do one thing. These talks together, if we could have it as for the when we go for the G20 deliberations, it would be a good idea to throw light on this and say, when we are talking about education, it's not about just technology, but we need to know about customs and people and life before we actually go into what we would say, bringing in changes to already existing situations. This is what happened to the natives also. When we talk about development, we are in fact killing another development that was already there. So I think it's time to be also looked into that.
I think
somebody from
interact, Usha.
Somebody had contacted me, and I had circulated this link to them. And I had requested him to please circulate the link to other groups under the C20. So I hope at least somebody would have joined, or we'll send them the YouTube link also. And then when we go for that conference, education and digital technology, we can explain to them how we are making use of the digital technology to spread awareness and knowledge.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Somebody wanted to interact there. Just a minute, Usha. Somebody wanted to interact. I think Samsung or M3R. I don't know who that one is. Somebody wanted to interact.
Hello.
She wanted to interact.
Hello, Jameela.
Jameela ji, please.
Yes, it's a very wonderful session. And also, what somebody said, we went to Canada and we learned how we are going and visiting is different. But to know about their culture, literature, everything is very, very nicely explained. Jameela, I don't know how to thank you and Usha ji and other friends to arrange this G20. So really, I am very happy, and we don't miss again in future also. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jameela ji.
Do join us for all our sessions.
I think
somebody
wanted to talk, I think. Somebody wanted to interact, no? Yeah? No? Okay.
We have here someone who has done research on a Canadian writer. Why don't you unmute and talk? She has left, I think.
It's left, I think.
Srikala, one of the participants here, had done a PhD thesis on M.G. Basanji, who is actually an Indian African Canadian. His ancestry goes back to Gujarat in India. He left, his grandparents left for Africa. He went to London to do his doctorate in physics. And then he moved into Canada and became a writer. And he writes about immigrant life in Canada.
He's still there, no, Jameela?
I don't think she is here. She was, I just saw her and then
No. Is Vasanji still alive?
MG Vasanji.
Vasanji is still alive?
Yes, he's still alive.
I've seen him.
Still writing. He has a book which is called The In-Between World. And he talks about how when immigrants go there, they find themselves neither white nor black. They are the in-betweens. He calls it the in-between world of Begum.
Yes.
Okay.
75% of youth from Punjab, they have migrated to Canada.
Yeah.
Canada, yes.
Yeah. In fact, there are whole streets where you have only Punjabi stuff, like
Yes.
all the dresses and the sweets and all that.
Like London, no?
Yeah, like London.
Like London.
Yes.
I think there's no other question, I think, Usha.
I think if there are no more questions, we can move to the vote of thanks. Dr. GB is here. Shall we move to the vote of thanks? Yes,
Shall I?
Can start. Yes, please.
Respected All India Women's Conference officials from New Delhi, other invitees, Dr. Jameela BV ma'am, Dr. Srimati Usha ma'am, Dr. Kamini ma'am, and all other dignitaries of this program. Good evening to one and all. Now, we are at the end of this webinar, and it is my duty to express our gratitude on behalf of All India Women's Conference Trivandrum branch. I would like to propose a vote of thanks to each and everyone who has contributed for the overall success of this webinar on the topic Indigenous People of Canada. As we know, G20, the group of 20 people, 20 countries. This year, India holds the presidency, and during this presidency, India aims at focusing on areas that have the potential, as she said, and for the structural transformation on the theme One Earth, One Family, and One Future. Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam. That's the theme of India's presidency. And at the outset, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to the officials from New Delhi. Srimati Kalyani Raj is here, Kuljit Kaur ma'am is here, Jameela ma'am is here, and too many other invitees are here. We are grateful to you all for your support, both financial and personal support. On behalf of All India Women's Conference Trivandrum branch, our profuse gratitude to Mrs. Kalyani Raj, ma'am, for your timely support and for your concern and for your thoughtfulness. Thank you so much, Kalyani ma'am, for being with us here. I would like to extend our gratitude on behalf of All India Women's Conference Trivandrum branch to Kuldeep ma'am, Jameela ma'am, and all other invitees from New Delhi. Thank you all. Thank you. And for the last 2 years, we have been experiencing this academic discourse under the leadership of Dr. Jameela ma'am, under the forum Literal and Cultural with eminent personalities on diversified subjects, topics. Dr. Jameela ma'am, hats off for this great initiative. And this is the 28th one so far, so excellent. And today we have started a new journey, as she said, in familiarizing all the G20 countries, the culture, the history, the tradition. This day was the day of Canada, the land that is clean. Ma'am, you have described it, narrated it very interestingly. The talk was very insightful and in-depth. And thank you so much for your valuable thoughts you shared. As Kamini Mat said, she is a full package. And definitely this presentation was a complete combo offer. Ma'am, Jameela ma'am, you said about the origin of Canada then history is cultural, multifaceted cultural. Then that story was very interesting, and the poem shown by you, that is very heart-throbbing. So ma'am, as a whole package, it was very interesting, and it is very, very informative and insightful. Ma'am, we are deeply indebted to you for your splendid efforts in making this event a great success. And especially, we are thankful for today's program. Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your thoughts and experience. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. And now we have been backed. We have been fortunate to be backed up with two pillars, and of course they are the central force of all activities of Trivandrum branch. That is none other than Srimati Indira ma'am, Indira Pillai, and Usha ma'am. I place on record our great sense of gratitude to Srimati Indira Pillai and Usha ma'am for the timely support and encouragement. Now,
Thanks, Usha. Thank you so much, Usha. Lovely experience. I really am telling you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gurjit.
Today, the doors of Canada has been opened for us. We had a very different picture of Canada. No?
I know.
It is like when childhood friends get together. They work together.
Yes, yes. Jameela ma'am, we are really, it was an interesting journey to Canada, virtual traveling along with you. Thank you so much, ma'am. And we extend our sincere gratitude to Dr. Kamini ma'am, the work coordinator, for putting her best efforts in making this webinar a grand success. Thank you, Kamini ma'am. Then, heartfelt gratitude to all the standing committee members, officials, presidents, secretaries, treasurers of different branches and the constituent branches. Thank you all. Now I convey our gratitude to all the participants for their presence and contribution to make this webinar a grand success. We solicit your continued support, and I think other 19 countries will be familiarized by different eminent personality. Usha ma'am will announce it later. Jameela ma'am will announce it later. Then we hope to see in the next forthcoming event. I think Dr. Kamini ma'am will say something about the next session. And again, many thanks to all of you. Thank you so much again and again. Thank you all.
Just for the information of those who are here, our next talk will be on Australian history and culture, and it will be delivered by Professor Suja Kuru. She is the director of the Australian Studies Center at the University of Kerala. So we are getting a very good speaker who has done a lot of research on Australian writing and culture.
Good.
So that's for next month.
The whole package of international tours while sitting in India.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can wind up the meeting now.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Thank you,
Okay.
Jameela, Kamini, Bhuneshwari, GB, all of you for helping me to put up this webinar. And we look forward to the next webinar on the first Saturday of June. And as Jameela has said, it will be on Australia. And then we'll continue with lots of interesting talks on the different countries of G20. So once again, thank you. Thank each and every participant for their lively participation and support. Thank you.
And this month we have another talk on disaster management, okay, by Dr. Tara. She'll be giving on 15th of this month.
Organizing a talk on disaster management by Dr. Tara. That is it on 16th? 16th of May?
16th of May.
16th of May. So that link I'll be sending around very soon. I hope all of you will join. Thank
Hello.
you.
Hello.
Yes, Jameela? Yes.
Hemlata ji. Hello.
No, I think.
Your mic is muted, Jameela.
Hello. Hemlata ji.
No,
No,
I
she
think.
left, I think.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So, okay, thank you all.
See you again at the next webinar. Thank you so much.
Hemlata ji has come. Hello, ma'am. No, I don't think she's there.